Turks and Caicos, and welcome to another episode of Disaster 365 radio show. This is brought to you by the Department of Disaster Management and Emergencies. I'm your host, Alison Gordon, and I'm the Director at the Department of Disaster Management and Emergencies. So thrilled to have you with us today on Radio Turks and Caicos 89.1 FM. Today we have a very special guest joining us once again, and she's Dr. Holly Hamilton, the Director of Meteorology at the Turks and Caicos Islands Airport Authority National Weather Service. Dr. Holly, thank you for joining us.
Pleasure to be here.
So let's start the conversation. The 2024 Atlantic hurricane season has commenced. And although we haven't yet reached the traditional peak of the season, which is August to September, we have already seen the impact of record-breaking Category 5 Hurricane Beryl early in July. Can you share with us the latest update for this hurricane season?
Okay, so the forecasts are still predicting an above-average hurricane season in the Atlantic Basin. So as of today, Colorado State University updated their forecast. Now, they are typically the first ones to put out their forecast in April. And so they raised their numbers slightly to 25 total named storms. In April, they would have predicted 23 total named storms. And then 12 hurricanes versus 11 hurricanes, which they would have predicted in April. And 6 major hurricanes, and they predicted 5 major hurricanes. So they just raised the numbers slightly. NOAA will update their seasonal outlook in early August, prior to the historical peak of the season. But I would like to note that the initial forecast that NOAA had put out in May was the highest they ever issued in May. Mm-hmm. So everybody's pretty much projecting that this could be an active hurricane season.
And it certainly has started that way. Thank you so much, Dr. Hamilton. So then, what are the predominant hazards associated with hurricane that we should be most concerned about?
So with hurricanes, as we know, to classify the category or, of those systems, it's based on the winds. So the winds are the predominant hazard. Then you have things like coastal flooding, which would be due to storm surge, inland flooding due to rainfall. So those would be your significant hazards. But the one that we always are concerned about is the impact of wind.
Okay. So should we be concerned about hazards such as hail or tornado or lightning or thunder? Should we really be concerned about those?
So hail doesn't typically occur in hurricanes. Thunder and lightning, it's rare. You might have some of that as well. Tornadoes can be spawned by hurricanes, especially when they're making landfall. I don't know how many people would remember, but I think it was Hannah, Tropical Storm Hannah, where it was reported that a tornado might have been spawned in North Caicos, I believe it was. Mm-hmm. So it does happen. Mm-hmm. So it's a hazard that we are aware of and we pay attention to, but it's difficult to predict, tornado spawning. We know that it is a risk. But again, like I said, your major hazards that you should be concerned about would be the winds, mm-hmm. storm surge, mm-hmm. and rainfall.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Hamilton. And I think it's important for us to inform our listeners that although we're talking about hurricanes and we're in the hurricane season, there are hazards that can impact us outside of the hurricane season. Earthquakes have no season, so we can have earthquakes, we can have fires. So although we're talking about hurricanes, I really want to emphasize to our listeners that we must be prepared at all times for any hazard whatsoever. So thank you so very much for that. And then following on, the whole matter of timing is crucial during an emergency. So what is the time window for evacuation to take place just to ensure maximum safety?
So I believe in the previous episodes, I would have define what a hurricane watch versus a hurricane warning is, and what, again, because wind is the major hazard that we're concerned about. Anything in terms of preparation, getting to a safe place, all that needs to happen before the onset of tropical storm force winds. Now, to bring it to home, I know that in terms of the Turks and Caicos Islands, the vulnerable islands such as Salt Key, there is a mandatory evacuation for if there's a Cat 2 or Cat 3 system potentially going to impact the Turks and Caicos Islands. So it's crucial for persons to heed that guidance from officials, decision makers, because once you see those tropical storm force winds come, and even, and the system begins to near the warning area and start deteriorating the conditions in terms of the marine conditions and so forth, it's really not safe. At that point, you just have to shelter in place. So it's important that you heed to the instructions of the top decision makers and the officials, DDME, so forth, so that you can be safe, you and your family could be safe.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Holly. And I really want to elaborate on a point you made earlier, and that is specifically when we talk about Salt Key. I think it's important for our listeners to understand that we need to evacuate before we start experiencing certain conditions, because when we consider the mode of evacuation, it's going to be by the ferry. So if the sea is rough, we can't have persons evacuating. So we know persons are of the culture to say, oh, it's calm, I don't want to leave. But if you wait until that happens, then you will not be able to leave. So I am begging and beseeching our listeners, especially those in Salt Key, when we say evacuate, and don't expect us to say evacuate when we are already experiencing tropical storm conditions where our seas are rough and so on. So I just want our listeners to understand that and remember that it's all in safety. We want to ensure, and also too, that the vessels, the ferry that they're traveling on, then the owners of the ferry have to ensure that their vessel is docked and is safe. So it is important for us to have that lead time. So when we say evacuate, yes, the sun may be shining, yes, it may be calm, but you have to do that because of the other factors that we have to consider. So thank you so much for that one, Dr. Holly. All right, so can you explain for our listeners the basics of how weather forecasts are made, particularly for hurricanes, and then how accurate are the forecasts? Has the accuracy improved over the years? Talk to us.
Okay, so this is the fun part. So basics in terms of formulating your weather forecasts, and especially for hurricanes. Any forecast, it doesn't matter. You always have to consider the observations, because you have to take into account what the current conditions are. So when it comes to hurricane forecasting, you're looking at observations, whether it's satellite imagery, in situ observations that are coming from the hurricane hunters that are flying into the storm, and they have other instruments on there like radars and so forth. Surface observations, if the hurricane is near to land, then you might have some surface observations coming from different countries. Also, upper air observations. There's a number of countries in the region that release balloons that basically take observations as they go up into the atmosphere. And those are crucial because it gives us as forecasters and meteorologists an idea of the environment that these systems are in or moving into. And then radar imagery. So those countries fortunate to have Doppler radar, you can also get a view of what's going on in the system. So we look at all of that to basically get a picture of what's happening now. And then we move into looking at the models. Now, persons may be familiar with some models, and the popular ones would be the European models, the GFS, which is an American one. And those are the two people forecasters would predominantly talk about. But there's way more models than that. way more. And there's different types of models too.
Okay.
So you have your dynamical models, statistical models, ensemble models. That's basically you take one model, but you alter the initial conditions slightly and run that model a number of times. And so you get like a variety of simulations of what could happen. And then you have consensus models. So we as forecasters look at all of that. The folks at NAC, they're looking at all of that type of information. And then they conceptualize and figure out, knowing the specifics on how things work out in the atmosphere, what might play out. And so we use those models then to figure out how the storm will develop and deduce what the impacts might be. So if a system is approaching the country, what type of winds they will experience, what kind of storm surge, based on the intensity of the system, what type of rainfall you can project to occur. So that's basically all that happens. And then it comes out, especially when you're looking at the National Hurricane Center products, it comes out in the form of those products with the official track forecast, the cone of uncertainty, those graphics or products that shows the probability of a certain area experiencing tropical storm force winds or hurricane force winds. There's a lot going on and a lot of information that's basically being condensed and put together to make those products and make them in a way that's understandable to the public.
So you're saying though all that goes into it really contributes to the accuracy?
Yeah, so the forecasts have improved in time. And I went and looked back. So NHC, they're always analyzing how they're improving with their forecasts. So over the past 3 decades, there's been like a 50% improvement or reduction in the error.
Okay.
In terms of the track. And also we see a reduction in the errors associated with the intensity forecast as well. You see the most of the error usually occurs in the first 2 to 3 days of the forecast, and then it levels off. So they're really improving in terms of these forecasts. Basically, I guess to better explain it, they're basically predicting when it comes to like track or intensity, their 5-day forecast is as good as the 3-day forecast was 2 decades ago. So they're getting better with forecasting in the short term and the long term. And it's crucial to provide more of a lead time so that countries can have more of a lead time. And so in terms of intensity forecasts, the 24 and the 48 hours NHC forecasts now are on average off by 1 Saffir-Simpson category. So basically, that's why we always say it's important to prepare for 1 category higher, because to take an account for that error. Also, to take an account nowadays, because we're seeing a lot of rapidly intensifying systems, you could also take that into account. So just make sure that you're prepared for whatever may come. So yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Hamilton. TCI is said to be a coastal area, all right? But you do have some islands with, some amount of inland. So for those persons who are on the coastal area, what specific precautions should they take?
So with coastal areas, the concern will always be storm surge. And now that we have the risk maps that the National Hurricane Center have produced for the Turks and Caicos Islands, we can better assess that risk now. So in those vulnerable areas, it will always be important for persons to take heed. If that area, particular area is at risk, to just get to a safe place, a safer place. Because in conjunction with the coastal flooding, if you have rainfall flooding, I think we've experienced, some cutoff in some areas where you have like a lot of flooding. So persons that live in those areas, that would be the major concern.
Yeah, and I also want to add to, if I may, that we think about our hotels that are mainly on the coast. So we want to ensure that those plans, are in place so that we can continue to protect that tourism product. Thank you so very much. How do the National Weather Service collaborate with other agencies to coordinate emergency response and also information dissemination during a hurricane?
So the major stakeholder or partnership we have would be with DDME and making sure that we get the messaging across. I was recently reached out to by PPID now as well with the recent significant rainfall events that caused significant flooding here in Turks and Caicos. They also want to be able to be prepared for the onset of any major rain event. That
Who's PPID for my listeners?
Physical planning, infrastructure development, aka public works that we all know. So that those type of partnerships are crucial, so that we are better prepared here in Turks and Caicos for any weather event that could occur.
All right, thank you. Interesting. Just one more question for you though. Dr. Holly, just before we close, can you just remind our listeners how they can stay informed and be prepared?
So, as we always encourage you guys to follow us, Turks and Caicos Islands National Weather Service, on social media. We have Facebook, Instagram, X, I was about to say Twitter, and we're also on YouTube. And the same goes for DDME. And as we always say, download the DDME Alert app. Everybody should have that app on their phone by now. And then also you can get information from the National Hurricane Center as well. But in terms of getting that localized information, always revert to your local agencies and heed to the guidance from the local officials.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Hamilton, for joining us. Thank you so much for your valuable insight, your wealth of information that you would have shared with us today. Your knowledge and expertise has been very beneficial to our listeners. And then to our listeners, we just want to thank you for tuning in to Disaster 365 radio show here on Radio Turks and Caicos 89.1 FM. Join us next week as we continue the information segment. If you missed any part of today's show, you can find the recording on our YouTube channel, that's ddme.tci, or the TCI National Weather Service YouTube channel. Until next week, stay safe and be prepared.